Hi everybody, my name is Mandy Culver. I'm in my 11th year teaching 4K through 5th grade art at Northern Ozaki School District.
Hey friends, my name is Sarah Krajewski and I am an elementary art educator in Cambridge, Wisconsin.
Sarah and I are super excited to be going over this project with all of you today. So we're going to be talking all about paper plate floral sculptures. This is a project I do with 4th grade. I believe Sarah does as well, but could easily be used for any grade above that. Here's one lovely example, just to kind of get you guys excited about it. So this is one of my 4th graders project. I got permission to use this. The student just happens to be my neighbor. So this is one beautiful example. So you can see it's kind of like a bird's eye view of a bouquet of flowers, and I'm just obsessed with the way they look. So I do this project completely in white, and I'm gonna go over some of the materials first. So about, I'd say like 85% of the project is done just with paper plates. So with the paper plates, I got a lot of donations, and honestly, the cheaper the plate, the better. So I use just these super thin, flimsy paper plates. You can buy them in stacks of like 500. Inexpensive, and honestly, I said no to any of the more expensive like Chinette, those heavy duty plates, because those aren't going to be able to bend and twist around a lot. So the cheaper the better. I do have the coated plates, so they have just that slight sheen on them. I like the uncoated ones a little better just because they are a little bit more flexible, but these I got them for free from a donation, so we were going to use them. Okay, so paper plates, and then I do cut up some strips of construction paper for some of the flowers that Sarah and I are going to show you a little bit later in some demos. Okay, so there is a little bit of construction paper, and then the only other supplies we really use, Scotch tape just for sticking the flowers together initially, and then the way we get all of the flowers on the plate is hot glue. So the first day that students come in for this project, I actually start off class with a slideshow with a bunch of images of different artists and inspiration that we're going to use for this project. At this point, they have no idea what the project actually is or what materials we're going to be using. It's just kind of some discussion time and just exploring different images based off of the project. So I like to switch up the artist that I use as inspiration, and this project is great for that. I know Sarah uses some different artists, but I think it's really important to find some cool contemporary artists that are using paper in their artwork. It doesn't even necessarily need to be flowers in their artwork, but it's so cool to see, for kids to see what paper can do besides just drawing on it. So I've used a couple artists primarily in this project. First one is textile artist Heather Weegier. She does mainly textiles, but she's done a couple of exhibitions with some really awesome figurative pieces which happen to have flowers on them, and they're all white too, so it kind of connected to this project, but they're all made out of paper. And then I've also used Zoe Bradley as an artist. She does some paper florals as well. But one other thing that I do besides a specific artist, I've incorporated some origami images and things. Kids tend to be familiar with what origami is, and again, it's just another way of using paper in an art form. So that's kind of what we do in day one. And again, I love to get the information from the students. So as they're seeing an image, I'm not standing up there lecturing and talking about it. I want to hear from them. What do they see? What do they think? What are the materials being used, and so on. So that first day is really just for discussion. The last image that I always, or I have for the last couple of years, put in that slideshow are actually images of the project that they're doing by students from like a previous year. And then I ask them, you know, what kind of artist do you think this is? What kind of materials do you think they did? And then I blow all of their minds when I say that it was actually students from this school. It's always a big shock because they can never believe that 4th graders did this project. And again, I mean, they're pretty impressive, I think. On day 2, I start that day with actually demoing a couple of the flowers. So I demoed 5 different flowers, and Sarah and I are gonna split those up to show you guys how to make them as well. But that did not limit them. Those were just kind of the 5 main flowers that they could do, and a lot of them did one cut different and mixed this flower with this flower. So that was just a starting point for them to be super, super creative. I should mention also, they store all of their supplies in gallon plastic bags on either that first or second class, depending on how much time you have left. I just have them grab, we share these, I don't know, that might change this year, who knows, but they just cross off the previous name from the year before, and then they put their name on these. I really left it up to the kids to create their leaf designs, and honestly, they blew me away with all of the cool things that they came up with. I showed them a little bit how you could bend the paper back with a marker or a pencil or something, just to get some volume and some dimension into it, but they kind of ran wild with that. And then on all of those next days, and I like to give them plenty of days to finish this project because I want them to really feel like they have a finished project and solid. And the class actually came up with the requirements of the project. Obviously, I already had like a little idea of what we wanted them to be at the end of the class, but again, I want them to feel like they are connected to this project. So surprisingly or not so surprisingly, the kids always kind of come up with the same requirements. So we said, you need to create at least one of each flower for your final piece. And it's kind of hard not to make more of each to actually fill the plate. Next requirement might be the plate needs to be completely covered, so you can't see the bottom in many places. And then the last one is you cannot see the edge of the plate. So like I said, it was a bird's eye view, so you want to be able to kind of see those leaves or flowers hanging out from those edges. So my 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders use glue guns pretty regularly. So the first year that I did this project, I figured, okay, I'll throw a couple or 3 glue gun stations out in the room and they can just glue as they go. That did not work so well. We ended up with a lot of long lines for the glue guns. Some people are going to take longer than others. And it just kind of took away from work time. So as teachers, we are always changing and evolving our lessons and plans. So we just made it work. So the way I changed it, I still had a couple hot glue gun stations, but I switched over and kind of led that station. So I would primarily be standing at a glue gun station for most of the class, obviously where I could still view and help out the students. So what we did is I used some painter's tape and I blocked off a couple sections. So each class knew this is where you set your artwork once you need something glued. They had requirements to be able to come back to the gluing station and set their work down for me. And they, again, decided that as a class. And they thought it would be fair, in order to be able to come over to the gluing station, they had to have, let's say, at least 2 flowers completed and then 3 leaves completed. And that could vary based on the class too. So what they would do is they would have their base plate with their name, class on the bottom. They had to have that. If I found one without a name, I sent it back. But they just put their pieces that they'd created on their plate, and then they would come and put it into that specific station. And then I had a separate station blocked off with painter's tape that the finished pieces would go into. And by finished, I mean those 2 flowers and 3 leaves were glued on. Now, students could be very specific and tell me, I want this flower right here. But as a whole, we kind of just glued as we went and bunched them together instead of saying, okay, I want this flower here and this one here. We started in one spot and kind of went out that way. And that worked really well. And kids were still pretty comfortable with that. So I would stay over there, I'd get one glued, and right away I would shout that name out when I was done, place it in the done station. They would come back and grab it. And that way, that whole time that I was gluing on their project or other students' project, they're still at their tables creating more flowers and leaves. So at that point, when they got their piece, they might even have another batch ready to go. They could bring me more than what was required, but I tried to get them not to have 10 flowers done and 20 leaves done when they're bringing it back to the gluing station, because then obviously I would be focusing a lot more time on that one project. So that worked out really well. I did still have another glue station open in case they just needed to glue one quick flower, or not on this example, like on this one, like for this flower, you know, maybe I would glue the base, but maybe they just needed to glue a little detail on the inside or something like that. So they were still able to glue themselves, but I was doing the majority of the big pieces. And again, that ran pretty smoothly. You know, occasionally we might have a line of students for that other glue gun, but they were pretty respectful of it. Now, this year, you may need to have some different years based off of, you know, how you're spacing students out and things like that. But I think this is a really great project because you're not really sharing a lot of materials. You have your own plates that you're using, you have your construction paper, and hopefully students will just have their own scissors. The only thing you might be sharing is the tape container. I know Sarah's gonna go over a little bit about her process. Like I said, I do mine all white. She does that a little different.
I had my 5th grade students who completed the project do a painted plate version, which means that they spent some time doing like painting contests to see who can paint the plates the fastest, and we had table teams, and we had like runners where there was one kid, as soon as a plate was painted, would go run it over to the drying rack, and we did just decide at a time so that by the end of a couple days of painting, we had like hundreds of painted plates. So you'll see that it's one color on the inside and then an analogous color blended with it. It's a little cray-cray sometimes, but it gets the job done and it makes some really beautiful flowers. And I was also inspired by the paper flower artist Margie Keats on Instagram at @TheLovelyAv, and she creates these really beautiful kind of crepe paper flowers that look real. So we talked about how we can make something paper look realistic and then how it kind of lasts a lot longer, and the kids really loved that concept. So Mandy and I are going to talk a little bit about certain kinds of flowers that you can make and then how you put them together. And just like Mandy, we hot glued our flowers that our students finished to each of the paper plates, and then I displayed them for the art show with their colorful paper plate sculpture and then an artist statement underneath kind of describing some of their favorite parts or what they struggled with, or the parts that stood out to them from the project. So I'm going to show you some of the styles of flowers you can make. Now, if you also want to use the demo part of the video, of course, if you want to show your students, you could just cut out this part of Mandy and I describing what we did at the beginning, and then just play them the demonstration of what kinds of flowers they can make. And then your kids, whether you are virtual or in person or on a cart or whatever your art year looks like, your students can use that demonstration video to then make these awesome paper plate sculptures. So hope you enjoy. So first I'm going to show you how we make something called a fringe flower. And the fringe flower is just around the outside edge, and then we use the center for making kind of a base for the flower. So the fringe flower just needs a little line cut into pretty much where this like edging stops, and then cutting out the center circle. And after you've cut out the center circle, we just set these more flat circles to the side, because we're going to use those to make some interesting bases, or we could use them for fringe, and they're kind of fun, especially if they're different colors. So now that you have the outside cut, you're basically just going to have kids cut a fringe around the outside here and keep going until the whole thing is cut. They can make them like super duper skinny or really wide. It kind of depends on the effect that you're looking for. So I'm going to cut my fringe. When you're done cutting the fringe around the outside, I always like to make a little base, kind of like just an interesting floral shape, so that I can set my fringe piece on the inside. But of course, you can do this using just flat paper. It's just nicer because the paper plate is a little bit thicker. And then also saving your scraps too, because some of that you can cut as extra details or kind of just collage some pieces together for your paper plate. So I'm going to just kind of curl these up so that that gives it a little bit more of a three-dimensional look. You could even like cut a slice in and then sort of change that, but this is like my little base for my flower. And then I'm going to take the fringe and just roll. And this is especially cool when you have a double-sided piece of kind of your paper plate, because then no matter which way you look at it, it's got this really cool edging around it. So I'm going to keep going until this whole thing is rolled, and naturally, since it is a circle, it's going to just like keep rolling in the shape of the paper plate, which is pretty convenient. Okay, so this is kind of the blue in the center, and then I've got my orange on the outside, and I can sort of peel these edges out to make them a little bit more 3D. You could just like loosen it a little bit and it makes the flower a lot bigger. And then we'll of course just tape this edge down so that it doesn't unravel. You could use glue, you could use Scotch tape or something to make it stick, but tape is just the best first initial way to make it stick. And then I would have a station where the kids could come and deliver their flowers to me, and then I would hot glue, and I would probably even do a few layers of this because this base is kind of wide, but maybe cut in a little bit further and then have it curl up around that flower a little bit more. So of course they could do just these flowers and make a bunch of these little fringe flowers, and then maybe include some different kind of center. So this one is the fringe flower.
This is one of the flowers that actually does not require the paper plates. For this project, or this flower, I take my 12 by 18 construction paper, cut it lengthwise, so they're all 18 inches long, and then various widths on the side. So I'm gonna start with one of the bigger ones. So using the different size papers, it would just create a shorter or taller flower. All right, so I'm gonna start with this piece of paper in front of me. So this was like the 6 by 18. And I'm gonna actually fold it in half. All right, now when the kids fold it, I ask them to match it up. And usually we ask them to, give a really good crease. This one, I say, it doesn't need to be a super sharp crease. We want it to crease just enough so I can cut it, but I'm leaving it a little bit loose because then it's just gonna help those flowers look kind of beautiful and round, okay? All right, so got that part done. I'm gonna flip it over. So this one, I definitely need to always go over this because you always have a few that are gonna cut on the wrong side. So you always wanna cut on that folded side, okay? So you're going to make some little cuts, and you can kind of change how thick you make them, but you want to stop cutting at the approximate same spot all the way across. All right, now that we have all those cuts across the whole piece, we've got the open side, we just keep it folded, and we're gonna roll this up. Doesn't matter what end you start on, but I'm just gonna kind of roll it pretty tight. And I always remind the students to kind of try to keep a circle. Sometimes you'll get kids that are just kind of folding in half each time, so it turns out kind of flat like that. So we want to keep it in a circle. This is where our Scotch tape or whatever kind of tape you're using comes in. I've got just normal Scotch tape, but I also had like a little white paper or poster tape. The only reason I would use this is to keep it like that white color if you didn't want to see like the sheen of the tape or something. But that poster stuff's expensive, so don't want to waste it. All right, give it a little tape. So that's obviously really important so they don't unravel. Occasionally, I'd have students playing with them and then they'd come unravel, in which case you can't always push them back down, so you might need to start over. So I just remind them of that as I'm doing it. So the best part, I kind of put my finger through one of the loops and then I just press them down. So I tell my students to start on the outer edge and work their way around. And we just kind of bounce them down. All right, so as you keep going, obviously, then this is what it looks like.
We're also going to learn how to make the edge flower. And an edge flower starts the same way as a fringe flower. So we're going to cut out that center, and you can make it a little bit of a wider edge if you want to, or a little bit smaller. And of course, saving these center circles because they're going to be great for making things like bases or even leaves or fringe on the inside. They're nice and thick for that reason. And then we're just going to go ahead and cut some sort of interesting edge around the outside, like maybe a wavy line. And the deeper you cut in, the more drastic the petals are going to be. But it kind of, again, as the students will learn, it sort of depends on what the effect is that you are looking for. So this is why I love using the colored paper, because it gives you a really cool effect. When you start rolling it up, everything looks just a little bit different. And the kids could even use this for an edging, or maybe like literally glue these pieces inside here, and then they have a different layer on them. So that's why even the scraps can be super cool. Then we're just going to take this outside edge and again, simply just roll this up. So start nice and tight and then roll, and it kind of makes the look of like a rose or a really small bud. And again, if you want it to be a little bit bigger, just let the students set it on the table, and it's going to get a little bit wider. So this is a little bud, and then I'm gonna let mine pop open a little bit more, and you could even, again, pull these edges down to reveal a little bit more of that color, or just keep it kind of rolled up. So a little bit of tape on the edge is going to stop it from expanding. And then we've got ourselves a little bit of an edge flower. You could even tighten that in the inside to really make it nice and tight. And then you could use this base to add another layer and kind of a wrap around the outside.
All right, this next flower has been called the waffle cone flower. So it's these, kind of like this. You can see there's a lot of variation in size. So I'm gonna show the basics, and this one's really great for being able to change it up a little bit. So you're gonna take one of your paper plates, and you're gonna cut straight in towards the center. Now there's not a definite place to stop, but I always say cut a little smaller because you can always make the circle bigger. You're gonna cut a circle out of the center. And then just meet right back at your cut. So that part comes out. So you're left with a plate like this, okay? It's not perfectly center all the time, but we kind of just make it work. So after this, you want to decide what you want the edges of your flower to look like. So you can imagine there are a lot of ways you could do this. You could do kind of like a scalloped edge, a zigzag edge. I did one that's looks a little bit more like a petal. So you're just going to start cutting that edge. You could go down a little farther if you want. Then those petals could be bent back later on. Okay. Just switch it up however you would like. So I have one ready to go, just like this, okay? So it kind of looks like, you know, big stereotypical sunflower or something like that with a hole in the center. So where you cut that first slit, you're just going to start rolling it. And this one's easy. So you kind of just wrap it around. I don't always tell them they have to make that super tight or small because they might be adding something else inside. You can see when you loosen it up, it looks really awesome too. And then you can bend back the petals, curl them back with a pencil, colored pencil or something. Let's say I like it like that. I'm gonna give it a little tape. Or, you know, if you want these to be a little stronger and you want to use glue, you could do that. Obviously, you have to hold the connections, so got to be careful with that with the heat. And then when we were gluing these on our plates, I suggested not always just doing them straight up and down. As you can see on these, they kind of did them to a slant. It also was a good space filler then too. But the cool thing is you could actually put something really neat inside. So let's say they come up with a different flower. I'm just gonna use my bounce flower from earlier. You can see that you can come up with a lot of really cool things to make this a little bit more interesting. Okay, so that's the waffle cone flower. All right, my friends, this next flower we've been calling the layered flower, simply because it has layers on it. So that's this one right here. You can see kind of the curly ends. There's a lot of ways you can make this kind of unique to your own project, but let me go over just the basics that I showed them. So they were required to have at least 3 layers on this flower. We talked about having one large, one medium, one small, and then you can go from there. Some students even did like something a little different on the inside, on the very center of it. But we started off with these basic shapes. They could change up the petals, the lengths, the thicknesses, all of those things on their own. I'm gonna set those aside for a second. You definitely could use paper plates for this one. I actually encourage students to save all of the pieces they cut out, especially if they were flat. Those are like gold because those can be just used as normal paper. If they don't have that, they could definitely use construction paper, and that's actually what I used for my example. So I had some construction paper out for them. A lot of students I was seeing struggled with just kind of drawing or cutting this by hand. So for those students, I encouraged them to find a space. They wouldn't start on the edge because then there wouldn't be room for the petals. So I encouraged them to lightly draw a circle and then kind of go off of that. Some of them actually drew the petals out, you know, draw, then turn, draw, then turn. Then that helped them. But we really wanted to discourage pencil lines, so either cutting those off or erasing them after. Some students just needed that base circle, then they could cut on their own without drawing the petals. So it just kind of, it's different for every student. All right, so once we have these, then we used hot glue. I'm just gonna tape them together for right now, however many layers they have. So they just did a tiny little dot of hot glue. You could also curl them ahead of time, and then they would just glue this on the inside. Okay, so I'm gonna take that off because I'm gonna curl ahead of time. Now for this, I'm sure you guys have used this in some form at some time in some project. So we just start at the tip of the petal, roll down. I give it a little squeeze as I go. You can see it shows up nice and curly. All right, so obviously all of those would be curled, but then you just layer them on. And I encouraged the students, like if they had a larger space they needed to fill and they had met the requirements, you know, this is gonna take up quite a bit of space on those as well, okay? Thank you all so much for watching and joining Sarah and I for this project. We wish we were all really in person, but I mean, we're teachers. We do what we have to do to get things done.
I know that this year looks a little bit different, a lot different than it has in the past, but just know that as an art education team, we can help support each other and make it a really great year, even though it's kind of weird. You're always welcome to reach out to me on Instagram. My handle is @ArtRoomGlitterFairy, and I will do my best to help you with any problems or questions or words of affirmation that you may need.
And my Instagram is @TheColorfulArtTeacher.
Have a great year, friends.
Thanks, everyone.